You have, again, your biographical sketch of Larry Walker, so I won't go into all the details other than to say one thing. Larry and I have been friends, personal friends, for probably the better part of 15, 20 years. He is an extraordinary person. A lot of people enter politics for a lot of different reasons, most for the right reason. Without a doubt, I can tell you that Larry Walker is an exemplary family man. He's an exemplary politician. He's a fantastic leader, and he's in politics, he's in government for all the right reasons, and that is to do the right thing as he sees fit. He does not let political considerations oftentimes stand in the way of taking stands on political issues that he thinks are in the best interest of Georgians. And we do well to have Larry Walkers in the legislature, and we do well to have more Larry Walkers. And without further ado, Larry Walker.
Thank you, Griff. I appreciate that very glowing introduction. I'm smart enough to know, though, that what I am here is the token Democrat that keeps you from losing your tax-exempt status. Given that, I'm worth several $1,000s to you, probably the most expensive speaker you've ever had here. It is great to be here. Griff and I were riding out this morning, and we were talking about what a beautiful city Atlanta was and how much progress we'd made in the last 20 years. And I told him, yes, it had been done under good conservative Democratic leadership in this state. It's great to be here. There are a lot of old friends here and some new ones too. I enjoyed talking to Mike Sullivan this morning. Mike told me he was going to be head of the Republican Party. Said we're on opposite sides. I said, no, we're not on opposite sides. We're all trying to improve the quality of life for the people in this state, and I believe that. It's good to be with Sonny Perdue. Sonny's a majority leader in the Senate. You probably don't know, most of you don't know Sonny this morning. You will know him in the future. I predict a very bright future for Sonny Perdue. Sonny and I happen to be from the same county. He's a majority leader in the Senate, and I'm the majority leader in the House. Now, if you come down into Houston County and you see a lot of roads being paved, it's strictly on merit. It's not. We need the roads down there. One of the first lessons I learned in politics was when I was running the first time in 1972. And a man told me, said, Larry, if you'll let the other fellow do all of the talking, when you leave, you'll be surprised at how smart he thinks you are. And I think that's a lesson that all of us should take. And really what I should do this morning, Griff, is probably just say that I'll answer any of your questions and sit down, and I'd probably be smart if I did that. But I'm going to comment on a few of the issues that I see before the General Assembly in 1995. And then I am going to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you want to ask. In fact, as I go through my little talk, and that's what it is, a talk, not a speech, if I say something that you disagree with, or if you have a question, you feel free to interrupt me, and I'll be glad to try to answer your question. Obviously, the most important thing that we do in the General Assembly is the budget. We could probably pass the budget every year and go home and do nothing else, and the state might be better served for it. The state government is getting to be big business. It's over a $10 billion budget this year. Over 55% of the budget goes into education, either into the public schools or the colleges or the vocational schools. Prisons is one of the fastest growing areas in the state budget. As I understand, we are taking in, so to speak, over 100 new prisoners a week. That's 5,200 a year, or about 5 new prisons a year, 1,000-bed prisons. They cost the taxpayers in this state about $25 million each. And in every 3 years that you operate one of these prisons, you spend about a like amount of money to operate it. So if you're talking about a $25 million prison, you're talking somewhere $8 to $10 million a year to run that prison. Obviously, all of us want to get tough on crime. We have gotten tough on crime. We have one of the strictest crime bills in the country. Most places in the country, they're bragging about 2 strikes and you're out. We talk about 2 strikes and you're out. We're putting people into prison for life with no opportunity to be released. I do not oppose that. I voted for it. But I say to you that has serious economic repercussions. and we're going to see more of that in the future. When you put somebody in at 35 years of age for life and they stay there until they're 85 years of age, they get old, they have to be cared for, you have to provide medical services, on and on and on, and somewhere down the line we're going to see serious economic ramifications from that. There's been a lot of talk in the state about privatization. I think that most people in the state legislature, Republicans and Democrats alike, favor privatization wherever we think that it can work. We have been criticized roundly by some for building golf courses in this state. I would say to you that we do not have but one golf course in this state that doesn't make money for the state, and that's a 9-hole course that we have somewhere. Other than that, all the golf courses that we have in this state make money for us. Now, having said that, I still think that at every possible opportunity we ought to let private enterprise do prisons and even maybe do schools or anything else that we think can successfully be done in the state. I want to talk to you this morning briefly about compensation for state legislators. I had a reporter from the Macon Telegraph to telephone me one day last week and said, "Larry, we polled and 91% of the people said they did not want the compensation of state legislators to be increased." My response was, the people have no idea what the legislators are making. I said, in fact, you don't know what we're making, and he didn't. I said, most people think that state legislators are making the same thing that congressmen are making, $125,000 a year. And I dare say that if I passed a paper around and asked you this morning what a state legislator is making, you would have no idea, most of you, what they're making. We're making $10,300 a year. We're among the lowest paid state legislators in the country. And I say to you, you get what you pay for. And if this continues, you're going to see more good people get out of the legislature, and you're going to see two classes of people in the legislature, those that don't need the money. $10,300 means absolutely nothing to them, or people that $10,300 is a lot of money. And I don't believe we want that kind of situation in the state. The per diem is $59 a day, again among the lowest in the country, and I say to you that you cannot come to Atlanta, and you know this, and live for $59 a day, and I think that we ought to raise the, I don't think we're going to see any effort made to raise the compensation of legislators. I do think you might see an effort made to raise the per diem of legislators during the 1995 session. We're going to do a lot of talking about taxes in 95, as we do every year. Given Governor Miller's throwing cold water on the Tax Reform Study Commission, I don't think you're going to see much done other than talk during the 1995 session. I do think there's a strong feeling in the legislature that we want to see some ad valorem tax relief for the citizens in this state. That's what we hear when we go home from our constituents, is give us some ad valorem tax relief. And I think that when we're smart enough to determine how we can assure that the local officials, county commissioners, and school boards will have to pass tax relief back to the ad valorem taxpayer, that it will be mandatory, that you will at that point see some tax legislation in the General Assembly. I, for one, would like to see the tax taken off of intangibles. I think it's outlived its usefulness. I think that when you have any tax that some people pay it and a lot of people don't, that it's a bad situation. I think that's what you've got in this state. The problem with that is that the intangible tax is a tax that inures to the benefit of local government. It goes to local governments, and if we are going to take that away from them, we're going to have to replace it in some fashion. The gasoline tax that we have in this state is the second lowest in the United States of America. Second lowest. There's one state, and I can't call it now, that has a lower gasoline tax than we do. I say to you that we do not have the second lowest gasoline prices in the country. That says to me that the big oil companies are making more on gasoline in this state than they are making in some other states. We have a very ambitious developmental highway system that will do a lot for this state. It will not be completed in my lifetime unless we infuse it with more money. We are putting about $100 million a year into the developmental highway program, but we're requiring them to pay the debt service on bonds, so they end up having about $60 million in order to work on the developmental highways. And we've paved little segments here and little segments there. If you've traveled this state, you know what I'm talking about. I've heard Speaker Murphy say that's about the stupidest thing he's ever heard of. Well, if he'll go back and look at why it was done, it's not so stupid. It was done for political reasons. If they had said we're going to build 441 first, he would and no others until we complete that, they would not have been able to have gotten the political support necessary to pass it. So consequently, they developed this massive program with highways all over the state, and they've paved little segments here and little segments there. I do think that sometime in the near future, and perhaps not in the 95 session, you're going to hear talk, and you might even hear it in 95, about a nickel a gallon increase in the gasoline tax, maybe with a 5-year termination, with that money to go solely and completely for the developmental highway system, so that perhaps that system can be completed at some time in the foreseeable future where some of us in here might be able to enjoy those developmental highways. Governor Miller has proposed removing the sales tax from groceries. I say to you that that's going to have a lot of resistance in the state legislature. I am not, from my constituents, hearing a lot of clamor for removing the sales tax from groceries. That would cost us about $500 or $600 million when it was finally completed. And if you cut that out, you've got to cut some programs. And I think the responsible thing to say is that if you're going to cut out $500 million, where are you going to cut the programs? And I don't see that being done. And not only that, but it's extremely complex, perhaps not for the big grocery chains who have scanners and can determine what's groceries and what's not. But when you go to the grocery store, a lot of what you buy is not groceries. It's toothpaste and mouthwash and paper products and razor blades, and if you remove the sales tax off of groceries in these small grocery stores and you go to the counter, how are they going to determine what's groceries and what's not? And I say to you, what they're probably going to do is just say it's all groceries and not collect the sales tax. So I think that that particular proposal of the governor is going to meet some resistance in the state legislature. One of the things that I have been particularly interested in is seeing some consolidation of governmental services in this state and some consolidation perhaps in the future of governments in this state. We have 159 counties in this state. We have over 500 cities. I don't think anybody knows exactly how many cities we do have. We have, I think, Dr. Shoemaker, 179 school districts. We had 180, but there was one consolidation of a city and county system within the last 2 or 3 years. I wasn't smart enough to figure out whether that gave us 178 or 179. But in any event, we have 178 or 179 school districts. We have over 700 authorities in the state. No accountability. They have the ability to issue bonded indebtedness, and nobody's really looking at them. That doesn't count the state government, the federal government, bureaus, and agencies. I say to you that we have too much government in this state. I decide to go to the Georgia coast fishing, and I leave my hometown of Perry, and I drive to Hawkinsville, and it's 20 miles to Hawkinsville. I'm going down 341 to the Georgia coast fishing. And I drive from Perry to Hawkinsville, and it's 20 miles. And I drive from Hawkinsville to Eastman, and it's 20 miles. And I drive from Eastman to McRae, and it's 20 miles. And I drive from McRae to Hazelhurst, and it's 20 miles. And why is it that way? All county seat towns. I'll tell you why it's that way. It's that way because when the state was laid out, the county seat was located in such a place that a man and his family could drive a mule and a wagon from the furthest outreach of the county to the county seat and back in one day. It's still that way in 1995. My wife Janice is in the travel business. She has a little travel agency in Perry, Georgia, associated with the Carlson Travel Network, which is a national travel agency. Somehow the Minnesota Republican Party, Mike, got my wife's travel agency's toll-free number. And the Minnesota Republican Party made all of their travel arrangements to go to the Republican National Convention in Houston, Texas, through my wife's travel center in Perry, Georgia. Janice said they'd call down there and they'd talk a while, and they'd say, "Who are we talking to?" That's the kind of world we live in today. And yet, in the delivery of our governmental services, we're still in the dark ages. For 20 years, I represented Macon County in the General Assembly. Macon County is a county of about 13,000 people. It's got 4 cities: Montezuma, Oglethorpe, Marshallville, and Ideal. In that county of 13,000 people, they have 5 law enforcement agencies, the 4 cities and the sheriff. They have 5 firefighting agencies. They have 5 garbage collection agencies, and on and on and on. And I say to you, in 1995, that doesn't make much sense. What makes a lot more sense is what they've done in Crisp County, where the city of Araby has contracted with the sheriff's department to do their law enforcement work. And I hope that in the future we can continue to pursue this to encourage consolidation of governmental services and hopefully, ultimately, some consolidation of services. Transportation in this state, I think we've done well. If I was giving us a grade on how we've done in transportation with our 1,200 miles of interstate highways, our 4 ports, Bainbridge and Columbus and Savannah and Brunswick. 4 ports, 2 major rail systems, Hartsville International Airport, the thing that makes us distinctively different from Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina. If I was grading us in transportation in this state, I say that I'd probably give us a B+. With a rapid rail system that would break this circle around the Atlanta metro area. We talk about 2 Georgias. There's not 2 Georgias, there's 5 or 6 Georgias. Sonny and I from Houston County, Warner Robins and Perry and Bonaire, Sonny. Don't want to leave Bonaire out. There are 200 of them, isn't it? With those good roads we're going to get down there. We don't live, you know, economically we're doing well. In the other areas of the state, Decoa and Douglas and Tifton and Valdosta and we could go on that are doing well. But there are many areas of this state in southwest Georgia that the economy is not any better than the economy of a third world country. And I say to you that with a rapid rail system where you could get on a rapid rail in Macon and be in Atlanta in 30 minutes, or Gainesville and be in Atlanta in 30 minutes, we'd do a lot to break the circle around Hartsville International Airport. We need regional airports in the state. Every governor we've got, they brag on all these direct flights from Atlanta to London, Atlanta to Shannon, Ireland, and Atlanta to Tokyo. Wonderful. You try to get a flight out of South Georgia to go somewhere. We need to talk about regional airports. But I think with more emphasis on rapid rail and regional airports, we could give ourselves an A in transportation. 1936, Senator Russell and Gene Talmadge were running for actually the United States Senate. And there were 3 issues in that campaign. And the issues were improving transportation, and as I said, I think we've done a good job there. Streamlining government, we haven't done such a good job there. And then the big issue in 1936 is the same big issue that we had when Guy Milner and Zell Miller ran against each other, improving education in the state. And Dr. Shoemake, I hate to say it, but I come before you today to say that I think that education in this state, I think I'm being generous to say it's a great sea of mediocrity. We have not done the job. We are not doing the job in this state. Obviously, we have had what I call historic problems that other states have not had to deal with. Nonetheless, we have not gotten the job done. Let me mention a few things that I think that, and let me say this, I handled QBE for Governor Harris. I was his floor leader in the House at that time, and I handled it for him, and it passed without a dissenting vote. Had I to do it over, and if it were in my power, I would like to see us come with a greatly simplified education plan. I think it's extremely complex, from the funding formulas, which I don't think anybody really understands, and Dr. Shoemake knows what I'm talking about, on up and down, a very, very complex piece of legislation. But let me briefly mention some things that perhaps we could do to improve education in this state, realizing it's not going to be easy and realizing it's going to take our best minds in order to get the job done. I commend Governor Miller for his initiative to cut administration. I think we're administration heavy in this state and have been for some time. I started practicing law in Perry in 1965. When I came back to the county, the school board office was located in the courthouse. Mr. Lewis Tabor was the school superintendent, and C.B. Hickson was the assistant, and they either had one or two secretaries. In 1965, they ran the Houston County school system out of that two-room office in the courthouse. Today, they've got 60 people working in the school board office in Houston County, and I just wonder how many they do have in Gwinnett County and Cobb County and Fulton County. And I commend Governor Miller on his initiative to about slash in half the cost of the administering of the schools in this state. We need to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio. It's tremendously expensive, and we talk about it, but we don't do anything about it. And the reason we don't is it costs so much. That means building new school buildings. That means more classrooms. The ramifications are great. But again, I want to commend Governor Miller for the lottery money. The people say it's done extremely well. It's taken in lots of money. I guess that's doing well. It's taking in lots of money. And I commend him for his living up to his pledge to use that money on nothing but new programs. But I say to you that the icing is getting bigger than the cake. We've got a cake over here, and we just keep piling this icing up on top of it, and the cake we need to put more into the cake, in my opinion. It's almost, to me, and I don't know what the answer to it is, because we don't want to usurp education funds with lottery money. But having said that, we're begging to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio, and in all due respect to our host this morning, the Apple computer people, we're just buying computers for everybody in the world, wiring up every school, and I think that we need to seriously talk in the future, Sonny, about biting the bullet and reducing the pupil-teacher ratio. We don't need to continue to start new programs till we fully fund the old ones. We've been bad about doing that, and we're probably going to do that some in 1995. We need to really return the control of the schools to the local school boards. Not just talk about it, but do it. In some instances, education would probably not be as good, but in most instances, I think you'd see some bold and innovative things done on the local level if we would truly turn the schools back over to the local school boards. If there's some architects in the room, and I'm sure there are, they're not going to like this, but we need prototype schools in this state. It just makes sense to me that you ought to be able to come up to Atlanta and pull off the shelf if you want a 500-people school or a 1,000-people school, they ought to have 10 sets of plans up there, and they ought to have somebody on board to help you with it, and you ought to be able to pull them off the shelf and not spend 6% of $15 million is lots of money to build a school that I think we could be putting somewhere else, and I think we really ought to think seriously about prototype schools in the state. I think, and again, this flies in the face of some conventional wisdom, and this is just my idea, we need to really return to basics, truly return to basics. I almost think we would be better off if the first 4 or 5 years in school they didn't teach anything but reading and math. Because if you can't read, in my opinion, you can't do anything else. We need to reward teachers that are doing a good job and keep them in the classroom. What has happened in this state is that teachers, salary-wise, top out. They reach a point and they can't go any higher, so they go into administration. And we need to stop that, and we need to reward our best teachers and encourage them to stay in the classroom. And lastly, we need to really return discipline to the classroom. Without discipline, you cannot have anything. You can't have a football team, you can't have a family, you can't have a school. I have introduced a bill that I hope will pass in 95 that says that if a teacher, in attempting to discipline a child, gets sued, that the plaintiff has to show that the teacher is willful and wanton, and that's hard to show. Willful and wanton, and if the plaintiff cannot show that the teacher can recover his or her expenses and attorney's fees. It also says that the teacher, the school board, will have a preliminary hearing, and unless they determine that the teacher was willful and wanton, they have to furnish the teacher with a lawyer. And I think it's time that we gave the teachers some tools to do the things they need to do in order to return discipline. I said this in Athens. It got a little attention and publicity. You know, people's civil liberties are important, but it might be that we're going to have to give up some of those civil liberties in order to get back to real discipline and running things like they ought to be run. One or two other comments, and then I will answer any questions that you might have. In my opinion, the media in this country is out of control. If there's an institution that's out of control in the country, it's the news media. And I think we're going to have to insist that the news media decide, are you in the First Amendment business or are you in the money-making business? And I say to you that more and more of them are in the money-making business, just like you business people are, and not in the First Amendment business. And I say to you that the only way that we're going to get this back under control, if you agree with me that it's out of control, is make them accountable for what they do and say, just like you're accountable for what you do and say in your business. When I was a small boy, I'm talking about the late 40s and 50s and even into the 60s, I heard my grandparents say, Georgia's a great state. And I heard my parents say, Georgia's a great state, and I heard their friends say, Georgia's a great state. And I come to you this morning to say that during that period of time, by any objective standards, Georgia was not one of the great states in this country. We lived in a hot climate, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. And those of you that grew up in Georgia and are my age, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We had a preoccupation with race and racial matters. Economically, the two most important things that ever happened to the South, and in Georgia in particular, air conditioning and integration. Air conditioning, a lot of you have businesses in this state and have moved here from other parts of the country. If it wasn't for air conditioning, I assure you, you wouldn't be here. Integration allowed us to get into the mainstream of the country. We would have never gotten into the mainstream of the country without integration. We suffered from a lack of capital, not only in our economy, but in the government as well. We grew the peanuts, but the big money went to the peanut butter makers. But we have made much progress in the last 25 years, great progress. And I come to you today to say to you that if we can make government more efficient in this state, and if we can improve education in this state, Georgia will truly become, if it is not already so, one of the great states in this country. And I look forward to working with you and your leaders as we make it the kind of state that we want it to be. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Thank you.
But it's a little more than the discipline. While it is acknowledged that you cannot legislate morality, something must be done, and our little church is starting. If we would get into protesting school bands, we'll get out there in the field on these football nights, doing all these little sexual innuendos. That needs to be cut out of the school system, because you cannot get the children to stop pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, and everything else, and you got a band out there showing them how to do it. And that's part of what needs to be done. We need more families involved with the educational system. And that's the only way you're going to get crime and everything else stopped in the school.
I thank you for your statement. I think it's obvious, and it's been said before, that the basic problem is a breakdown in the family. There's no doubt about that. Having said that, how we reverse that, I don't know. You go home tonight and you watch your television. The biggest influence on your children and grandchildren is not the church, it's not the school, it's not you, it's the TV in most instances. And you go home tonight and you watch the TV and you tell me if there's anything on TV promoting family values. Is anything on the billboards that when you ride up and down, and in the magazines that you read, and even at the school halftime shows like you indicated, that's promoting family values? And we're swimming against a swift current. And I don't have the answer to that. But obviously until we get that under control, we're not going to see a lot of changes in areas where we would like to see changes. Yes, sir. I think it's tearing at the fabric of the country. I think to a detriment of the country. I think the vast majority of the people in this country are not interested in partisan politics. In fact, I think they're turned off by it. There are a few people that are involved in party politics that think it's important. The vast majority of Americans do not. They're going to vote for the person, in my opinion. I think there was a time when the party was important to inform the people. Mr. Sam Nunn Sr. ran every campaign that the Talmadges ever had in Georgia. And when Mr. Sam Nunn Sr. said that Gene or Herman Talmadge was a good person and we ought to vote for him, people in Perry and in Houston County would vote for him because Mr. Sam Nunn Sr. said so. Today people go home and they watch the TV and they know just as much about the candidate as I do. And they're not too interested in who Larry Walker says they ought to vote for. And as I said to you, I think that a person in this country could go on TV 2 or 3 weeks before a presidential election, had enough money and the right exposure, and could get elected president of the country. I think that's what we're coming to. We're going to see more and more going directly to the people and less through the party politics. We talked about Judge Lance Ito is probably better known than Al Gore. True. You can laugh. You think about it. You ask the man on the street who Al Gore is, and you ask him who Judge Lance Ito is, and you see which one wins. I say Lance Ito would win. And I think that's the kind of world we live in. And I think the Ross Perot was not a flash in the pan, just like I think the election on November 8th was not a flash in the pan. I think the American people are trying to tell us something. I think they were telling us something with Ross Perot, and I think you're going to see more and more of third-party independent candidates that are going to be viable candidates in this country if they've got the money to get the exposure. And if they're good enough, they can get the money. Yes, sir, Richard.
Larry, having spent a few years in local government, I appreciate your efforts on something to do with the ad valorem tax, particularly in areas that have been around and have matured where the growth of the tax base doesn't expand. And I commend your effort on the efficiency of bringing local government services as contracts and consolidating. And in that regard specifically, I have a feeling that this year, after many years of attempts, the bill to create the city of Sandy Springs, which adds another local government rather than consolidate, may move through the General Assembly. What is your feeling on that particular issue?
Well, I'm going to avoid the direct question and tell you what I really think ought to be done. And I talked to Bill Campbell, Mayor Campbell, who I'm very impressed with, extremely impressed with. Well, you've had an opportunity have you to visit with him and hear his thoughts. But I commend him to you. I think he's trying to do the right thing by Atlanta. But what I think, and also I think Mitchell Scandalakis is doing a good job. I would say that. I think what needs to happen in Fulton County is that Atlanta needs to be expanded to cover all of Fulton County. You have African American politicians that are afraid of that. They're afraid they'll lose control of Atlanta. You have white voters who are afraid of that. They're afraid that African Americans will dominate it. I say to you, given those two individuals, that there's a good chance that under that scenario, Bill Campbell would be mayor and Mitchell Scandalakis would continue to be chairman of the Fulton County Commission, and something's got to happen in Atlanta. You know, it's a city of 300,000 with a shrinking tax base, and Atlanta is the engine that drives the wheel in this state. The good old boy legislators that know what's going on know that, and I'm one of them, I guess. We know that. We understand that. We put the Georgia Dome here. We put the World Congress Center here. We've done the right thing by Atlanta, and it's not all altruistic, I'll say that to you. It's because we realize the importance of it. But in my opinion, what should happen is that Atlanta ought to be all of Fulton County. It ought to be one city, and I think that would expand the tax base, and You run into problems, I understand, with the school situation and the school boards, but I believe that's what ought to be done, Richard, rather than incorporating other cities. That's just my opinion. Yes, sir, Tripp.
You didn't have opposition this fall, but obviously some of your colleagues did. During the final weeks of the election, there was a slick sheet that went out of voting records by the Christian Coalition. Would you comment to your exposure to the accuracy and the credibility of those slick sheets, those voting records?
Well, I think there was lots of misleading information in them. I think that, as a member of the Perry United Methodist Church for 52 years, I guess, I wasn't a member when I was born, but for all practical purposes, it was ordained that I would be a member. I didn't have much choice in it. What I've always been taught is that one of the basic tenets of any religion, Christian or otherwise, is truthfulness and honesty. And I think to mislead and mischaracterize is not right. I think we're slipping into dangerous waters when we start using our churches for political purposes. Now, having said that, and being a Democrat, the Democratic Party has used churches in the past for political purposes. I would have to say that, but I think it's a dangerous precedent. I think we're getting off when we start saying if you're a Republican, you're more of a Christian than you are if you're a Democrat, or vice versa. I think that's very, very dangerous, and I think to mislead and mischaracterize, that's not new in politics. That's gone on, I guess, since there's been politics. But to use the church in that, I think, is reprehensible, if in fact that's being done. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the House of Representatives will consider this year as a reasonable term limits allowing for debate?
No, sir. I do not. I think that, I'm being honest with you, I guess that's what you want. That's what I'm going to give you. When you say, will they consider it? Yes. Will they pass it? No. I think there's a big difference in my mind, at least, and I think we've got to start making this distinction in other areas as well, in citizen legislators that come to Atlanta 40 days a year, go back home and work in their law office or their insurance agency or wherever, and legislators that are full-time. We are on the firing line. We're in touch with our people. We know what our people want. They have access to us. We're not like congressmen who go to Washington 9 or 10 months out of the year. They can hide. They can get away. There might be more merit in my mind for term limits there than there are on the local level. Now, I understand some of the arguments. I've been in it 23 years. I guess I'm a little jaded. I think you get tired and you get jaded, but I think that's for me and my people to decide whether or not I ought to come back rather than from some artificial limitation. I understand that people of goodwill can differ on that, but I do not think it'll pass in the Georgia General Assembly. If you had term limits, you wouldn't have Newt Gingrich today. You wouldn't have Sam Nunn with the stature he's had. And I think in particular in the South, and maybe not in the 1995 South as much as in the past, but seniority is what's given us a little edge in the South and has enabled us to catch up with the rest of the country when we've been behind from the very start. So I think we've got to be careful that whether we promote that or not, even on the national level. Realizing, again, there's some good arguments on the other side. And when you speak, you'll get an opportunity to give us the ones on the other side. Yes, sir.
The changes you talked about in education, are they going to happen soon, or are they in the works?
Well, Dr. Shoemaker, who I think, Franklin Shoemaker here, who I read carefully what he writes, and I think that he's put out some of the, at least to my mind, some of the best thoughts on what we need to do. He and I were talking about it this morning. A lot of entrenched people, a lot of people that have turfs, a lot of people that financially benefit from us not changing, and it's very, very difficult. It's a huge, huge engine going down a track, and to stop it and turn it around is not easy, but I think we're going to have to stop it and turn around if we're going to see any major improvements. And the people want that, and I think that's what the people are telling us. They want to. They told us that on November 8th all over the country. We're listening. Yes, ma'am.
Along those same
I think there's a will to shift there if we can be convinced that in fact we are preventing. There's so many what I call, even on the, more so on the national level, but to some extent on the state level, what I call black hole programs, where there's just not enough money in the world to cure the problem. And you can just keep throwing money and throwing money and throwing money at it. That's what we've done at education to some extent. I mean, education has not lacked in the last 10 or 15 years in this state for money. And yet the job's not getting done. And I think if somebody can convince that, yes, in fact, this will prevent, that we'll fund it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We have a majority of the seats in the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate in the last general election were uncontested. So the people in those districts really didn't have a choice. If you and Rossborough are right, that partisan politics are part of the problem, why don't we make it easier for independent candidates, for instance, to get on the ballot and give people a choice, and make it easier for public initiatives, so if the people do think that something should be right, they can get on the ballot.
Good point. I wouldn't say just because I would argue with your basic premise that they didn't have a choice. They could certainly have qualified and run, and they can get on the ballot. I think that in most cases, where at least I want to think this because I've run uncontested so many times, that the reason you don't have opposition is twofold. Number one, the people are generally pleased with you, and number two, they don't think they can beat you. Any other questions? If not, I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope you can continue to maintain your tax-exempt status.